And then the fall is repeated on the level of visible creation with the fall of first parents. And one of the first intersections between the spiritual world and the material world is the involvement of this fall. We are told in our revelation that at some point, we don't know what point, because when we speak of the angelic world, as soon as we kind of project onto the angelic world our limitations of history and time and space, of course, right away we're speaking of a spiritual world in material terms. So it's not really an accurate way of speaking about it. But in the world of the spiritual beings, there occurred a revolt against God by one of the principal archangels. Some would say it's not a doctrine of the church, strictly speaking. Some would say that this Lucifer was the greatest of the archangels. He had a very beautiful name. Lucifer means the light bearer, the radiant one. Perhaps it could be said, as many have said, that his angelic mind was the greatest of all the angels, because just as there is all this variety among human persons, we can understand also that there's a great variety among the angelic personalities, because we have to remember that all of the angels and all of the devils, as we're going to speak of them, they are, we can't think of them as ideas. They are people, as we are people. They are personal beings. They are not material beings, but they are personal beings. We're told that there was a war in heaven because Lucifer, the great angel, wanted to be worshipped as God was worshipped. Did not want to worship God, but wanted to be worshipped as an independent God. Set himself up against God. And, of course, central to this first sin, this first entry of evil into the created order, then, is the pride of Lucifer, who sometimes even, because especially in the book of Revelation, as it's described, but also in other places in the Gospel, in the prophet Isaiah, the great adversary of Lucifer in this spiritual battle that fought in heaven is the great archangel Michael, and some say even the name of Michael the archangel, which means who is like God, should be translated as a question. That in Lucifer setting himself up as an independent God, the name of Michael, who is like God, who can be like God, was central to his victory on the spiritual level. There is a victory of Michael and the angels that loved God and served God and adored God and remained in communion with God as the author of their life and their being. We're told that Satan, Lucifer, becomes Satan. The name Satan means the adversary or the accuser. And we're told that in this rebellion, Satan and those who follow him are thrown out, cast out of heaven. Again, we can't understand that in any sort of geographical way. It takes place on a level of existence completely independent from geography. But they lose their place because they voluntarily have chosen, by the abuse of their free will, to turn away from God. And another very important aspect of the fall of Satan is that in addition to his pride, which made him set himself up against God. See, that's the refusal of Satan to worship God, the refusal to worship and to instead to insist upon the worship of self. That is what in the end is the essence of all sin, all rebellion against God. But we're also taught, and this is very important, that there was also in Satan great jealousy or envy. And when the question is asked, what was Satan jealous of? What did he envy? The answer that is given in our church tradition, based on the scripture, is that he was jealous and envious of human beings. We're told in one of the books of the Old Testament, the Wisdom of Solomon, which sums up many other statements, by the envy of the devil, death entered into the world. Because the central to this is, who does Satan and his devils, the fallen angels that belong to him, what do they do after their fall? They continually try to destroy and poison the material creation, and their hatred is especially aimed at the human beings. And often it is said, again, we wouldn't make this statement into a definitive formulation of doctrine, but it's a consistent thing that's said within the life of the church, that when Satan, who had this great angelic mind, perhaps the most intelligent of all God's angels, saw that God made this creature, the human being, having within himself both the material and the spiritual worlds, that God had a destiny for him. Perhaps it can be said that Satan understood partially that God had made the human being to be the height of his creation and was going to be given his greatest favor. That Satan, in jealousy and envy and hatred of what God has done in bringing into being the human creation, turned against God and now spends all of his evil energy in trying to destroy the human creation and turn the human beings against God. That's why the presence of Satan in the fall of the first parents is central. That it's the desire of Satan to bring death. By the envy of the devil, death comes into the world. He sees that there is a material being created to be immortal by God, and he wants to spoil it. So by the jealousy of the devil, death comes into the world. Now, again, when we speak of the devil and his legions of devils, the demons, we have to be very clear, first of all, that they are personal beings. They are not ideas. They're not sort of some kind of psychological projection of man's fears, as some people would like to describe them. Especially how many there are even those in what we would call the liberal Christian churches who would laugh, when we say that we insist that central to what has been revealed and what has been experienced from the beginning by God's people is that there is this personal enemy and those spiritual beings who are with him. On the one hand, then, the devil and his hosts are personal beings. On the other hand, though, we cannot make them into some sort of evil force that is the equal and opposite of God. I think I mentioned that already, but it's very, very, very important that the devil is a creature. His knowledge is very subtle, as the old hymn of Martin Luther says. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate. It's true that his knowledge is very great, but it is the knowledge of the creature. The devil is not the opposite of God. The devil is not some sort of evil pole of the good God. That in no way has the immeasurable distance between creator and creature been bridged there. That the devil has a beginning. He is a creature who has chosen to reject God. Now, from the fall that takes place in the spiritual creation, we have to proceed to the account in the Scripture of the fall of the first parents. Now, of course, also the human beings have the gift of free will. They are created in the image and likeness of God. That does not mean, however, it's not correct to, or as some would translate it, in the image and according to the likeness. That doesn't mean that when we say that the human beings come into existence absolutely perfect with no growing to do. That if they are going to remain in the image and likeness in which they are created, if they are going to grow in communion with God, which is God's desire for them, they have to choose to use their free will to love and obey Him. And that is what is central to the story that is recounted in the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis, of the disobedience of the first parents. That God sets them in a paradise of delight, where they are to be immortal. They are to be the king and queen of the whole creation. Even in the Genesis account, everything is brought to Adam, and he names all the creatures. And see to name something, especially in the orientation of the Bible, to know someone's name, to give the name to something, is to have authority over it. That's why when the name of God is revealed, it's not man who names God, rather it's God who reveals His name to man. But man gives the name to the creatures, so that reveals that man is created as king over all creation. But there is one thing in this paradise of delight that, of course, you realize he is told not to do. That there is this one tree that God says the man is not to touch. And I prefer to understand that 3rd chapter of Genesis, as I mentioned last week, as a spiritual and symbolic account of something that it's not clear to us what it is, what precisely is forbidden. But God set apart in this original relationship He had with the first parents as an act of obedience, something that He is not to do, and if He does it, that act of doing it will be a turning away from God. And we're going to talk about that a little more in just a second. God also gives the warning, and here it's important to listen carefully to the words of Scripture, because it's central to what we're going to say in so much of what's going to follow. He warns the man and the woman and says, if you eat it and if you touch it, as I have told you not to do, He says, you will die. And I stress that you will die because God does not say, if you do this, I will kill you. I will get you. That's not the context there. It says, if you do this, you will die. It's not what I am going to do to you if you do it. It's what you choose. It's all based on choice. So, immediately then, following that warning by God, the fallen Lucifer, Satan, enters the picture. And he says, what's this that God has told you not to do? It's a very nice tree. See, why has God told you not to do this? He knows that if you do this, and if you take this to have it for yourself, you will become like Him. You will be the independent God. That's what I want to be too. That's the whole core of my being now. Okay? The Satan's fallen being is consumed with being the independent God. And so he tries and succeeds to tempt the humans to become the same thing. See, so the first sin is taking what was forbidden by God to do and stealing it, disobeying, stealing, consuming it privately instead of remaining in communion with God. The woman eats the fruit; she gives some to Adam, and he does the same. So this nature of sin that is revealed there, it's the word. In fact, the word to sin in the Greek, amartia, is the word for sin in Greek, and this center of it comes from the same root as the English mark. And always when we put in the Greek language, when you put the a in front of something, it's a negative prefix. In this case, to sin is to miss the mark. To use something for what it is not intended. That's what happens in the original sin of the first parents. That they want to consume this fruit independently from God and become like God of themselves. That's the difference between God, through his communion with them, gradually raising them higher and higher to the immortal image and likeness that he has them destined for. Now we have man saying, no, but I will be that myself. I will be the private God. I will be the individual, independent God. And that is at the core of every sin that has been committed from the beginning, from the fall of the first parents until now. Central to that is this abuse of the free will by man, desiring to become his own private God apart from God. Well, the result, and it's a catastrophe, to use that word in its fullness of emphasis, that it's a tragedy of tragedies that happens as a result of the sin. Man, who is created to be the immortal king of creation and never dies. He becomes mortal. And with that becoming mortal comes a whole collection of other things that happens to him. Not simply does he become subject to death, as if that were not bad enough, and central to any Christian being able to really respond to the gospel is this understanding, not simply on the level of the mind, but in the heart of the being, that we are not created by God to die. That it's the exact opposite of what should have happened to us, and that it remains until the last human being has come into the world. It remains a terrible tragedy. In addition to this mortality, we have evil being multiplied throughout the world, and that's clearly what's being described there in Genesis after the fall of the first parents. Then in the next chapter you have the children of the first parents, Cain and Abel, one murdering the other. Then in the next chapter you have all kinds of lusts and perversions multiplying among the human creation. Then in the next chapter you have God saying, even, of course this is speaking of him using human language, but because of the multiplication of evil, which one of the great saints of the church, St. Athanasius, describes as once evil began, once evil entered into the human creation, it's like a snowball rolling down the hill. It goes faster and faster and gets bigger and bigger. That because of the multiplication of evil, God says that he is sorry for creating man. And then the flood comes to wipe out everything that's been created, and a new creation emerges from the flood that's carried over from the old, from Noah. But even after the flood, God still sees that the heart of man is wicked from his youth, that the flood does not correct the problem. See, that's central to the understanding of the flood. That something has happened that cannot be fixed simply by human effort. That something has been radically altered within the heart of the human being, the heart of the human character, that makes the immortal communion with God and the man being the priest over all creation impossible. And so we have to talk about the rest of the results of the fall so we can understand that properly. Another, then, we're listing the results of the fall here, so I think I'll write them down. We have mortality. We have the multiplication of evil. We have man becoming a very vulnerable creature. By vulnerability, I mean that even though man is created at the height, at the top of creation, there enters into the human existence on the material and spiritual level this frailness. This it can be illustrated simply by the helplessness of the human baby when it comes into the fallen world. You know, in the nothing is so helpless than as a human baby. Nothing is so vulnerable as a human baby. On the other levels of living creatures, plants and animals, you know, they come into existence in a very real way, more sturdy than we do. So many things can go wrong with us. We are vulnerable. Such even on the scientific or biological level, such a complicated creature, and we would say on the spiritual level, such a mysterious creature becomes so vulnerable, so frail. His mind, his intellect that distinguishes him from the whole rest of creation becomes darkened. Darkening of the mind. The darkening of the mind can be described in two ways. The inability, we could say, for man to completely figure out, using his own mind, much of anything. Our knowledge of ourselves, of the world, only goes so far, and then there is that point where it stops. And also, the frailness of the human intellect, which is one of the greatest gifts bestowed by God, as a result of the fall, becomes subject to all kinds of twists and distortions, or as we could use modern language, when mental illness takes place, when something goes wrong with the mind of man, it often creates in us a greater horror, even than physical illness, because we see the reverse of this gift, which is supposed to be a reflection of the image and likeness of God. So the darkening of the mind, sometimes the teachers of the church like to express that as the frustration of the being. We could call it the frustration factor. You know, that everything that we do is subject to various levels of confusion. Then another way of describing the results of the fall that my teacher, Father Alexander Schmemann, talked about so much, and if you read some of his books, as later on I'm going to recommend that you do, he uses this expression that man, as man who is supposed to be the priest becomes man, as he liked to use this word, he did it intentionally, consumer. That the human being who is supposed to be continually offering the whole creation back to God and receiving from God everything that has been created as a gift from Him, instead devours and spoils and consumes the creation, using it only for his own self-gratification, increasing more and more through every generation. And then we would say, I'll put it up here because it's last and greatest, we could say it's linked to the mortality. The worst result of the fall is that man becomes imprisoned in a world of fear. That the death that he has caused to enter into his being that was not created to die, begets in him, because the fear that is at the base of all other fears is the fear of death. Even on the level of human psychology, that would be confirmed, but we don't even need human psychology for it. That all the fear that we have, and our fears, our internal agonies, which also are our griefs and sorrows, those also in our fallen state distinguish us, for example, from the animal world. Animals can suffer, but animals do not know the suffering of fear and internal agony that the human being knows. That's why when we talk about, sometimes in just the ordinary way of human speaking, it's said that when man falls, when man becomes evil and sinful, he becomes a beast. Well, it's not really true. He doesn't become a beast. A fallen human being is something very different from a beast, and in many ways worse. See, the beasts don't do any of the things that man in his evil has done, both not only against God, against himself, and against the rest of creation. So man, when he falls and becomes chained, imprisoned in all these things, becomes capable of great and terrible evil. And the reason why, and this is perhaps the most important thing that's being said this evening, the reason why man continually multiplies these evils is that he is afraid to die. Now, I want to try to illustrate what we're saying by that. We're told in the Revelation that if man sins, misses the mark, turns away from God, seeks to become a private God, he will die.
This is the end of the message on this cassette. For the continuation of this message, please go to the next cassette.